A wedding is supposed to be the happiest day of your life. The moment when two souls become one, surrounded by family and friends, celebrating love that's meant to last forever. But for one woman, her wedding day ended in betrayal so shocking, so unthinkable, that even today, years later, people still can't believe what happened. Picture this. You've just said "I do" to the love of your life. The cake has been cut, the champagne is flowing, and everyone is celebrating your perfect union. But just 20 minutes after exchanging vows, your entire world comes crashing down when you discover your new husband in the arms of someone you trusted most. This isn't fiction. This isn't a movie plot designed to break your heart. This is the real story of Sarah, a 31-year-old woman whose fairy tale wedding became the stuff of nightmares, recorded and shared by guests who witnessed one of the most humiliating scandals ever to unfold at a wedding reception. How does a perfect love story collapse into betrayal in less time than it takes to watch a sitcom episode? How do you go from saying, "I do," to screaming, "How could you," before the wedding cake is even finished? And what kind of person could smile at your wedding altar while hiding a secret that would destroy everything you believed about love? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Sarah Mitchell had always believed in fairy tale love. At 31, she had found what she thought was her Prince Charming in Michael Thompson, a construction manager with kind eyes and a warm smile that made her feel safe. They had been together since high school, navigating the ups and downs of teenage romance and growing into adults who seemed perfectly matched for each other. Michael was the type of man every woman dreams about. He remembered anniversaries, brought flowers without being asked, and talked about their future with the certainty that comes from true love. He worked hard, saved money for their wedding, and spent evenings planning their life together in their small apartment overlooking the park where they had their first date. Sarah worked as a nurse at the local hospital, known for her compassionate nature and infectious laugh that could brighten even the darkest shifts. Her colleagues often commented on how lucky she was to have found someone who truly cherished her, someone who would text her sweet messages during her 12-hour shifts and surprise her with her favorite coffee when she got home exhausted. Their relationship seemed like something out of a romance novel, the kind that makes single people believe in love and married couples remember why they fell for each other in the first place. When Michael proposed on the same park bench where they shared their first kiss, Sarah's world felt complete. The ring was modest but perfect, chosen with the same care Michael put into everything he did for her. As they began planning their wedding, Sarah chose her closest friend, Jessica, to be her maid of honor. Jessica had been there through everything: breakups before Michael, career changes, family drama, and late-night conversations about dreams and fears. Having Jessica by her side on the most important day of her life felt like the final piece of a perfect puzzle. The venue they selected was a charming country club on the outskirts of town, with gardens that bloomed magnificently in the spring and a ballroom that had hosted generations of love stories. Everyone who knew them agreed they were the perfect couple, destined for a lifetime of happiness. Family members would comment on how they still looked at each other the way they did in high school, with eyes full of love and future plans. But sometimes, the most beautiful facades hide the darkest secrets. As the wedding date approached, subtle changes began to emerge that Sarah initially dismissed as pre-wedding stress. Michael, who had always been attentive and communicative, started coming home later from work, claiming overtime projects that seemed to multiply as their wedding day drew near. His phone, which had always been casual, left on counters and tables, suddenly required a password that he changed frequently, claiming work security protocols demanded it. When Sarah would glance at his screen during their movie nights, he would quickly tilt it away or flip it face down, explaining it was just boring construction documents that would put her to sleep. These small changes felt like tiny splinters under her skin, uncomfortable but not quite painful enough to address directly. Sarah found herself making excuses for behaviors that would have concerned her in anyone else's relationship. Jessica, her maid of honor and supposed best friend, also began acting strangely during the wedding preparations. The woman who had never missed a girls' night or failed to return a call within hours suddenly became elusive and distant. Wedding dress shopping trips were canceled last minute due to work emergencies that Jessica never fully explained. Phone calls that used to last for hours became brief, stilted conversations where Jessica seemed distracted and eager to hang up. When Sarah tried to discuss wedding details or share her excitement about the upcoming ceremony, Jessica's responses felt forced and hollow, lacking the enthusiasm that had always characterized their friendship. Other friends began noticing Jessica's absence from traditional pre-wedding events, whispering among themselves about whether the two women had experienced some kind of falling out. The bachelor and bachelorette parties, planned for the same weekend, created additional strain. Michael insisted on a guy's trip to a cabin in the mountains, while Sarah's celebration was supposed to be a spa weekend that Jessica organized, but then barely participated in. During the spa weekend, Jessica spent most of her time on phone calls, stepping outside whenever her phone rang, and returning with flushed cheeks and distracted eyes. Sarah's other friends noticed the tension and tried to create a buffer of normalcy, planning activities and conversations that didn't require Jessica's full participation. But the awkwardness was palpable, creating an undercurrent of anxiety that should have been Sarah's first real warning that something was fundamentally wrong. The week before the wedding, Sarah's concerns reached a breaking point during a dinner at their favorite restaurant. Michael seemed nervous and jumpy, checking his phone constantly and barely touching the meal he had ordered. When Sarah tried to discuss final wedding details, he appeared distracted and gave responses that didn't match her questions. She asked about the flowers, and he answered about the music. She mentioned the photographer's schedule, and he nodded absently while typing on his phone under the table. That night, Sarah confided in her mother about her growing unease, but her mother dismissed her concerns as typical pre-wedding jitters that every bride experiences. "Cold feet are normal, sweetheart," her mother assured her. "Marriage is a big step, and it's natural for both of you to feel nervous." But deep in her heart, Sarah knew this was something different, something that felt less like nervousness and more like betrayal waiting to reveal itself. The morning of May 15th dawned crisp and beautiful, with sunlight streaming through the windows of the bridal suite at the Rosewood Country Club. Sarah woke early, her stomach fluttering with what she assumed was excitement, mixed with the natural anxiety that comes with such a monumental day. As bridesmaids arrived with coffee and pastries, the room filled with the cheerful chaos of wedding preparation, makeup artists setting up their stations, hairstylists plugging in curling irons, and photographers capturing every candid moment of the morning routine. Sarah sat in front of an ornate mirror, watching her reflection transform as skilled hands worked to create the bridal look she had dreamed about for months, but something felt off in a way she couldn't quite articulate. Jessica, who should have been the most excited and helpful person in the room, seemed subdued and distant, going through the motions of maid of honor duties without her usual enthusiasm. She avoided eye contact during conversations, kept checking her phone with nervous energy, and seemed to startle whenever anyone addressed her directly. When Sarah tried to recreate the excitement they had shared during dress fittings by asking Jessica to help her into her gown, Jessica's hands shook slightly as she worked with the delicate buttons and lace. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked, studying her friend's reflection in the mirror. Jessica forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes and claimed she was just emotional about her best friend getting married. Meanwhile, in the groom's preparation room across the venue, Michael was experiencing his own version of morning anxiety. His groomsmen later described him as unusually quiet and distracted, going through the motions of getting dressed and ready without the joy typically associated with wedding day preparation. His best man, David, tried to lighten the mood with jokes and stories, but Michael's responses were mechanical and forced. When David suggested they take a few photos with Michael's phone to commemorate the morning, Michael quickly declined, clutching his device protectively and claiming the battery was dead, though David noticed it was clearly charged and active. As the ceremony time approached, both Sarah and Michael received mysterious text messages that seemed to increase their anxiety. Sarah glimpsed Jessica quickly typing responses to messages that made her face flush with what appeared to be panic. When Sarah asked who was texting so urgently on wedding day morning, Jessica claimed it was just her mother checking on arrival times for family members. Michael, similarly, was observed by his groomsmen responding to messages with increasingly frantic typing, his face growing paler with each exchange. David later recalled asking if everything was all right, and Michael responded with a tight smile, saying it was just last-minute vendor confirmations that were stressing him out. The energy in both preparation rooms felt heavy and charged, like the moments before a thunderstorm when the air itself seems to hold its breath. Wedding photographers, experienced in reading the emotional temperature of wedding parties, noted later that both the bride and groom seemed more anxious than excited, more focused on their phones than on the momentous day ahead of them. Sarah's mother, arriving to help with final preparations, sensed the tension immediately and tried to create a more celebratory atmosphere by opening champagne and leading toasts to Sarah's happiness. But even as glasses clinked and well wishes were shared, the underlying current of anxiety remained, a subtle warning of the devastation that was about to unfold just hours later. The ceremony itself proceeded flawlessly, despite the morning tension that had seemed to hover over both wedding parties. Sarah walked down the aisle in her flowing white gown, her father's arm steady beneath her hand, as guests rose to witness what appeared to be a perfect union. Michael stood at the altar looking handsome in his black tuxedo, though several guests later mentioned that his smile seemed forced and his hands appeared to shake slightly as he watched his bride approach. The officiant's words about love, commitment, and faithfulness seemed to echo with extra weight in the flower-adorned sanctuary, though no one could have predicted how tragically ironic those promises would prove to be within the hour. "I do," Sarah said with conviction, her voice clear and strong as she pledged her love to the man she believed would be her partner for life. "I do," Michael echoed, though his voice cracked slightly on the words, which guests attributed to overwhelming emotion rather than guilt. The kiss that sealed their union received enthusiastic applause from family and friends, who believed they were witnessing the beginning of a beautiful love story, not the final moments before its devastating conclusion. The reception began with all the traditional joy and celebration expected at such an event. The newly married couple shared their first dance to "At Last" by Etta James, swaying together in the center of the ballroom, while guests watched with warm smiles and emotional tears. Sarah felt radiant in Michael's arms, finally allowing herself to relax and enjoy the culmination of months of planning and preparation. The dinner was served flawlessly. Speeches from family members brought tears of joy and laughter, and the cake cutting provided perfect photo opportunities that seemed destined for wedding albums and anniversary celebrations for years to come. But after the cake cutting, as guests mingled and the evening celebration shifted into a more casual phase, Sarah noticed that both Michael and Jessica had mysteriously disappeared from the reception. At first she wasn't concerned, assuming Michael had stepped outside for air or to take a phone call, and that Jessica was perhaps touching up her makeup or handling some minor crisis that often arise during wedding receptions. Sarah chatted with relatives she hadn't seen in years, accepted congratulations from family friends, and basked in the warm glow of being the center of attention on her special day. However, as minutes stretched into nearly half an hour, Sarah began to feel uneasy. She asked Michael's groomsmen if they had seen him, and they seemed genuinely puzzled by his absence. She checked with other bridesmaids about Jessica's whereabouts, and they too were uncertain about when they had last seen the maid of honor. A strange knot began forming in Sarah's stomach, the same intuitive warning she had been experiencing for weeks, but had dismissed as pre-wedding anxiety. Something was wrong, and she could no longer ignore the feeling that had been growing stronger each day leading up to this moment. Sarah began a systematic search of the venue, checking the bridal suite, the men's preparation room, the bar area, and even the parking lot. With each empty space she encountered, her anxiety intensified, transforming from mild concern into genuine fear that something terrible had happened. As she rounded the corner toward a secluded garden area behind the main building, she heard voices coming from a small gazebo that was partially hidden by flowering bushes. The voices were familiar, intimate, and completely wrong for what she was hearing. Her heart began pounding as she moved closer, her wedding dress rustling against the hedge as she tried to see what was happening in the shadows. What Sarah saw in that gazebo would haunt her forever and destroy everything she thought she knew about love, trust, and the people closest to her heart. Sarah stood frozen for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds, her mind struggling to process the scene before her. Her new husband, still wearing his wedding tuxedo, was locked in a passionate embrace with Jessica, her maid of honor, best friend, and the person she had trusted most in the world besides Michael himself. They were completely absorbed in each other, unaware that their secret had just been discovered by the one person whose life they were destroying. Sarah's wedding bouquet, which she had been carrying throughout her search, slipped from her numb fingers and fell to the ground, the white roses and baby's breath scattering across the garden path like fallen tears. The sound of the bouquet hitting the ground caused Michael and Jessica to break apart, their faces draining of color as they realized they had been caught. Michael's expression shifted from passion to horror in an instant, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water as he struggled to find words that could possibly explain or excuse what Sarah had witnessed. Jessica immediately burst into tears, her hands flying to cover her face in shame and panic, her carefully applied makeup beginning to streak down her cheeks. "Sarah, I can explain," Michael started, but his voice sounded hollow and desperate, carrying no conviction that any explanation could make sense of this betrayal. Sarah felt something break inside her chest, not just her heart, but something deeper and more fundamental about her understanding of reality itself. The man who had promised to love and honor her less than an hour ago, the woman who had been her confidant and support system for years, had been conducting a secret affair that made mockery of everything Sarah held sacred about love and friendship. Without saying a word, she turned and ran back toward the reception hall, her wedding dress trailing behind her like a white flag of surrender, her carefully styled hair coming loose as tears streamed down her face. Bursting through the doors of the reception hall, Sarah stood before the assembled guests who were still celebrating what they believed was her happily ever after. The music stopped, conversations halted, and every eye turned toward the bride, who looked absolutely devastated despite being in the middle of what should have been the happiest day of her life. "The groom and maid of honor are cheating," Sarah shouted, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom with a clarity that ensured every single person heard the devastating announcement. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by shocked silence as guests struggled to comprehend what they had just heard. The reaction was immediate and chaotic. Sarah's mother rushed toward her daughter, arms outstretched to provide comfort for pain she couldn't yet fully understand. Michael's parents looked mortified and confused, their faces showing the bewilderment of people whose world had just shifted completely off its axis. Guests began whispering frantically among themselves, some reaching for phones to capture or share what was rapidly becoming the most scandalous wedding story anyone in attendance had ever witnessed. The wedding photographer, professional instincts kicking in despite the surreal circumstances, continued documenting the unfolding drama that would ensure this day was remembered for all the wrong reasons. Michael and Jessica appeared in the doorway moments later, their clothing disheveled and their faces showing the unmistakable evidence of guilt and shame. The crowd turned toward them like spectators at a tennis match, waiting to see how they would respond to being exposed in such a public and humiliating way. Jessica's husband-to-be, who had been enjoying what he thought was a celebration of love, stood up from his table with the expression of confusion that quickly morphed into understanding and rage as the full implications of Sarah's announcement became clear. This wasn't just about one couple's betrayal. It was about multiple lives being destroyed in real time before an audience of family and friends who had come to celebrate love, but were instead witnessing its most brutal destruction. The immediate aftermath of Sarah's announcement created a domino effect of revelations and confrontations that transformed the elegant wedding reception into something resembling a dramatic courtroom scene. Jessica's fiancé, Thomas, approached the guilty pair with a mixture of heartbreak and fury that was painful for everyone to witness. "How long?" he demanded, his voice shaking with emotion as he stood face to face with the woman he had planned to marry in just 3 months. Jessica's inability to answer, her continued sobbing and avoidance of eye contact, told him everything he needed to know about the depth and duration of the betrayal he had never suspected. Michael attempted damage control by approaching Sarah with desperate explanations that only made the situation worse. "It didn't mean anything," he pleaded, reaching toward his bride, who recoiled from his touch as if he were contaminated. "It was just a mistake, Sarah. I love you. I married you." But his words fell on deaf ears and an audience that was rapidly losing any sympathy they might have had for his position. Sarah's father, a usually gentle man who had walked his daughter down the aisle with tears of joy just hours earlier, stepped between Michael and Sarah with a protective stance that suggested violence was not entirely off the table. The revelation sparked immediate action from guests who felt compelled to document and share what they were witnessing. Cell phones emerged from purses and jacket pockets as people began recording videos and taking photos of the unfolding drama. Within minutes, social media posts were appearing with captions like, "Most insane wedding disaster ever," and "You won't believe what just happened at this wedding." The hashtag wedding drama began trending in their local area as videos of Sarah's announcement and the subsequent chaos were shared, liked, and commented on by people who couldn't believe such a scenario could happen in real life. Local friends and family members who weren't in attendance began receiving texts, calls, and social media messages about the wedding disaster. The story spread through their community like wildfire, with details becoming more dramatic and embellished with each retelling. Sarah's workplace colleagues were texting each other about their beloved nurse's wedding day nightmare. Michael's construction crew was sharing the story in group chats with commentary, ranging from sympathy to harsh judgment about his character and decision-making. The venue staff, experienced in handling wedding day emergencies ranging from weather disasters to family disputes, found themselves completely unprepared for managing a situation where the bride had publicly exposed infidelity involving the groom and maid of honor. The wedding coordinator, a professional who had seen everything in 20 years of wedding planning, later described it as the most dramatic and heartbreaking situation she had ever encountered. The carefully planned timeline for the evening, including planned toasts, bouquet toss, and farewell send-off, became completely irrelevant as the celebration transformed into a crisis management situation. As news of the wedding disaster spread beyond the immediate venue, local media began picking up the story.